Welcome, everyone. I'm Linda Amatucci, and on behalf of ConvergeOne and Microsoft, thank you for joining us today. We'll begin today's presentation after a quick review of your webinar console. If technical support is needed during the session, please click the question mark icon. The projector icon will open and close the slide presentation. Although all lines are muted during the webinar, the Q&A icon is live throughout the session where you can add your questions. We have also reserved time for Q&A at the end of the session to address any questions that would be good for the group to hear. We'd love to hear from you, so please send in your questions at any time. The person icon will show and hide speaker bios for today's presenters. And finally, at the end of the webinar, please click on the survey icon to share your feedback on today's event as well as events you'd like to hear in the future. This webinar is being recorded for on-demand playback. You will receive a follow-up email with the playback link. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to ConvergeOne National Practice Leader for Unified Communications, Ryan Humble.
Thank you, Linda. Really appreciate that. And first off, I'd like to just say thank you to everyone for taking 60 minutes out of your day to spend it with us today. We are really excited. We have a great session for you prepared today. As Linda mentioned, my name is Ryan Humble. I run the collaboration practice here at ConvergeOne. And first off, I'd like to just do a big shout out to Microsoft. Obviously, they have been a really great leader here through what has been just very difficult times, obviously with COVID-19 and everything that we've had to go through over the last few months. And really also a great partner to ConvergeOne, really helping to drive this important journey of digital transformation. So having said that, let's get started. I'd like to introduce one of my leaders who will take you through this journey today. He brings a tremendous amount of experience in this space and is one of the most passionate people that I've had a pleasure to work with really over the last couple of years. You're going to really enjoy, what he has today, what he has prepared. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over and also introduce Jeff Whalen. Jeff?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm Jeff Whalen. I'm the National Practice Director for our Microsoft practice at ConvergeOne. And really, I'm responsible for everything that has to do with the direction of what we're doing on the Microsoft business, which we're going to talk a lot about today. A lot of where our business is going and heading is around the team space, but also around just a modern workplace in general for Microsoft. And we're really excited to announce David Totten, the CTO for Microsoft. And one of the reasons why we're excited to have David on is he has a different perspective than what we see from ConvergeOne, and we would like to have him speak a little bit about his organization, what he's responsible for. And David?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hey, thank you everybody for attending. I think we're going to have a good conversation today. As mentioned at the beginning, if there's a question that we can help you address through this process, definitely let us know. I want to thank Ryan and Jeff and the entire ConvergeOne team for their dedication to continuing to help our customers transform through uncertain mobile and cloud-first times. I know the investment is huge on your guys' part, and so thanks for all the investment and effort you've made so far. Let me explain a little bit about what I do. I get this question quite a bit. What I do as the CTO here in our US One Commercial Partner Organization. In my perspective, what my organization is split into two pieces. One, I've got a set of technology strategists, and that's really the group that we sit down, and I consider them kind of virtual CTOs to our partner organizations. The other side of the organization are deep technical solution architects. And so once we work with a partner to develop a solution or figure out what solution they want to develop to solve whatever that outcome might look like, then we actually engage the architects to go build that particular solution. Now, why is that important for Microsoft? We have always been a channel-first company. We were built as a channel-first company. And if you think about Microsoft being a technology provider, we're not a Windows company. We're not an Office company. We're not a server and tools company. We're really a services and infrastructure enabler. And we rely on partners like ConvergeOne to really take our services and drive that last mile value to our mutual customers. So again, I want to thank the ConvergeOne team for all of their engagement and their investment in how we take first-party services and then how you take that to the end customers to really drive quick value and ease of efficiency for our mutual customers. So listen, we're going to talk a lot about Microsoft and what we're doing right now as it comes to collaboration. And before we get started, Jeff, I know we had a poll question out there just to ground the audience and where they are in their familiarity with one of our newer products, Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, we wanted to see if you're currently using Teams in your environment, what workloads are you using? Teams is not just your traditional unified communications platform. And that's one of the big differentiators that's recently come up is how do I work remotely, securely, but how do I do all these different types of tasks? And as we're going to talk about, we kind of wanted to get some feedback from the audience to see how are you using Teams? Are you using Teams today? And then what some of those things are, and we can kind of touch on some of those. So we'll give you a couple seconds here to kind of fill out that poll question.
All right, I've got my bet on the top one here, guys. How about you?
I'm going to go with full adoption. We've got nothing but full adoption.
Yes.
With 84 active million users a day, you would think that everybody's got it adopted, right?
You are.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at the results. Wow.
Well, actually, this is kind of surprising. So, decent chunk not using Teams. Mm-hmm. But then the one that's kind of surprising to me is using it for more than 2 areas of functionality today.
Yeah. Yeah, from my perspective, really good stuff. Thanks, everybody, for filling out that poll. It helps us get a gauge for where you're at with your understanding of the platform and how you're using it. The one that surprises me is we've got specific uses around calling. Typically, setting up a switch and leveraging a VoIP solution to drive some calling connectivity between employees is a single use case. And so that's interesting that over 5% have that. I love the more than 2 areas of functionality, but I lost my bet. It looks like full adoption is the third stack ranked scenario there. An interesting thing about Teams, as I use it, and I would like to consider myself as a power user of the platform, I still learn things on a weekly basis about what Teams can and cannot do. So hopefully throughout the course of this conversation, Jeff, you and I can help sort of bring to light some of the functionality and features that are available there, and then obviously how ConvergeOne can help customers with their digital transformation journey on that Teams platform. So let me just quickly take some time to set up the need for how we think about, meetings and how do we make meetings more impactful. And I know from my perspective, I spend a lot of time in meetings. Most of them I enjoy. Some of them not so much, but everybody has the same problems with meetings. You've seen those online sketches or those videos where they're like, is so-and-so on, or so-and-so's joining, or you've got a dog barking in the background, or can people not find the conference room in the right space? How do you set the right agenda, have a conversation, have a pre-read, have a post-read? Everybody has a different strategy with meetings, but that connectivity between people is very, very important. And if you think about these meeting types and how people engage with one another in a workplace environment or in a social environment, you've got almost, 60 and plus % of people who are engaged in meetings are actually not satisfied with that meeting experience, right? And typically it's going to be all those issues that we just talked about. No clear agenda, nobody knows who's driving. You might not have the right attendees at the meeting to solve what you need to have solving. And so how do we make meetings more productive? When we first produced this sort of insight slides where we talk about the need to have better and more efficient forms of communication and engagement in meeting infrastructure, right? This slide is pre-COVID, right? This is last calendar year, right, before our entire worlds were changed. And one thing is we've seen over the past several months, we've decided now, undoubtedly, 100% of meetings now require this virtual component. And so it's one thing when you can get people in a room and there's a lot of personal connections that matter. So how do you take that personal connection that you would typically have in a quick stand-up meeting, in a break room, in a specific conference room in your office, and how do you create that connected and efficient experience online? Now, video is becoming the new norm. It used to be, I myself have a team of almost 200 individuals spread out across the US. We do a lot of meetings with a lot of virtual attendees, but video was never the norm. Now you're seeing video become the norm. Jeff, you're in your office. Ryan, you're in your office. I'm in some room in my house that my kids aren't in right now. We have to be a lot more flexible with how we think about how to connect electronically, leveraging the tools and the techniques that we have to create that connected experience. But you'll notice when you do remote meetings, It's actually more complicated to keep them efficient, right? It's actually more complicated to set up the right work before a meeting, execute an efficient agenda during that meeting, and ensure that everybody feels that connected story during that meeting. That's where we think Teams can provide a really, really strong environment to support all of your collaboration needs as an organization. And that's why I want to highlight what Jeff just mentioned. Teams is more than just a unified communications platform. It's more than just a meeting platform. It's more than just a calling service, right? I view Teams almost as the operating system of the future. I actually typically don't even open my email through until the middle of the day. Because I do all of my communications and my high alert urgent notices all within Teams. I can look at my calendar within there. I can take notes on meetings. I can review documentation. I can collaborate. It's the operating system of the future. And it's actually the very first product that Microsoft has created in the cloud, for the cloud, with the cloud, right? If you think about all of our products historically, whether it's Windows Server or a product like Skype, we started with an on-premises version of that. And then we've created now an always on, always updated, always available version that's available via the cloud. There is no on-premises version of Teams. It's all designed and built and developed within the cloud. And there are several pieces of functionality as we think about the hub for engagement, the hub for teamwork that Microsoft Teams actually is. And it starts with a basic use case. Just how do I communicate? How do I do calls? How do I chat? How do I get persistent IM, right, across history of communication? One of my favorite features of Teams I use on a regular basis is I might have a communication or an IM thread going with somebody, and then I can add other people to that thread, and they can see the persistent chat, if I choose to let them, of what we were talking about before they joined. How many times has that happened to you where you hop into a meeting and you're like, okay, catch me up? Now, with persistent IM within Teams, you can actually give people access to what you discussed, why you started the call or the meeting in the first place, and they can immediately get up to speed with what you're discussing, right? The second really powerful feature of this platform of Teams is about collaboration. Every meeting Teams engagement has a Files tab, has an Open OneNote tab, has a Whiteboard tab. And so what you can actually end up doing, specifically within Teams, is you can post files up there, both in a chat window or just within a Teams infrastructure, and everybody can go co-author and collaborate on that document together. We found this to be one of the most impactful things to really make your engagement with your employees, your peers, your customers, and your partners. Like we did for this specific webinar. ConvergeOne is obviously outside of our tenant. They don't have @Microsoft.com email addresses. But the work that we did to produce this presentation, take notes, and walk through how we wanted to convey the value of a platform like Teams, we did all through the Teams infrastructure. There was a PowerPoint presentation that was created, shared, edited at the exact same time from people from my organization, from Ryan and Jeff's organization as well. That's really powerful work. I don't have to hop on a phone. I don't have to check something in. I don't have to send a document to Jeff and have his team make edits and then send it back to me. We can all access the latest and greatest version of any of our documentation and collaborate and co-author together. A really, really important platform on this, or a really, really important and valuable productivity experience on this platform. You know, the next thing I would say about Teams that I think a lot of people are a little misunderstood about is the benefit of having a web-based and cloud-based operating environment like this, and particularly on the Microsoft stack, is we can engage and interact with so many different applications, whatever you're doing. So we can build custom Power Apps or custom ISV applications, but you can also integrate and attach pre-built ISV applications. Let's say you have a payroll application or a benefits time tracking application, or let's say you've got an application you're building on your own that has an API. You can pull all of that through the Teams interface. And so everybody within your organization or within your specific teams can have access to that ISV application as well. That means you can connect your customer relationship management software and access contacts, information, and the latest updates all through Teams. That means if you have an ERP application or a critical line of business application, you can actually access that directly through the Teams UI. The user scenario where I found this most valuable is specifically for frontline workers, factory workers, bankers, school teachers, people that are working at grocery stores and retail outlets. If you want to push a line of business application, which could be a time card, it could be an internal SharePoint, it could be just documentation on training and frequently asked questions that maybe some of your customers or partners have. You can now push that to the mobile platform of Teams directly through that interface. They don't have to install a different application. They can just install Teams and access whatever applications and information you want through their Teams infrastructure. Then if they have a question, they can post it to the broad community or to a very specific user on that application. So again, I think the way to customize a user's experience for Teams and do that both from a centralized, secure, compliant mechanism that you can do from an IT administrator perspective, all the way down to an end user or a group perspective where you can push out policy en masse. That's a really key value proposition of the Teams platform to access all different types of applications across your business. And then finally, the last thing I would say is obviously work with confidence. Teams is, like every one of our other products, secure, compliant, has multi-factor authentication, and really make sure that you as an IT administrator can take comfort in understanding how to support and secure the environment of data, what comes in, what comes out, and then what users do within that experience. You also know that when a user themselves is actually accessing it and downloading and accessing different data or applications or environments with their Teams experience, again, it's secure, it's manageable, and it's compliant with what your company needs to ensure that you can avoid bad actors or avoid situations where you might have a data breach. So we went through that a lot. There's a lot of online documentation about Teams, but I do think it's really important because some people think about it only as an IM platform, instant messaging. Some people think about it only as a calling platform. Some people don't know that you can actually add and increase or even create ISV applications directly within the Teams hub. That's why we call it this hub for teamwork of Office 365 and why I personally use it as my operating system. So let me quickly touch on why Microsoft Teams and why now. Well, first off, obviously with COVID response, there's so much necessary to do things in a virtual environment, in a live, efficient, collaborative environment. Now we see this proliferation of internet access and devices that access the internet. So how do you keep up to date with communication and engagement across your teams? The biggest benefit I see from a Teams perspective is it applies to every user in the world. It applies to social conversations with your friends if you're doing a virtual happy hour. It applies to the CEO to really get a gauge of what's happening on her calendar, on her meeting invites, right? It applies to information workers who are accessing and co-authoring documentation together. It applies to that frontline worker scenario I was talking about earlier where you need to get access to information in a real-time fashion, but you don't want to carry around or log into a bunch of PCs, right? That virtual Teams experience applies to every single worker within your organization. The next two key benefits are around what else we can do besides just provide a platform for integration and collaboration. We leverage our artificial intelligence stack and the power of Azure infrastructure to really drive intelligence behind each of those meetings. Now you can leverage information with who you're engaging with and who you're collaborating with a suite of analytics tools to help you understand who you should be better connected to. Imagine if you could map out the interactions you have with other people in your organization to think about organizational alignment, or should you have a stand-up meeting with somebody on a regular basis because you happen to IM them or call them randomly a series of times. If you think about the incredible search functionality that we've always had within our Bing engine or our Microsoft Office 365 suite, now you can search and extend that information across the entire platform of Teams. Just this morning, I was looking for a specific document. And I could remember it came from, I think, one of 6 people. And I remember it had the word industry in it. And I know there was priority scenarios in there as we think about what those future priority scenarios are for us to drive solutions for. I didn't know how to find it. I could search in my email. I could organize by send to. I could organize by what date I think it had. I could go into my calendar and sort of like try and find out when was that meeting I had with that GM who specifically talked to me about those retail scenarios. Or I could just type in my Teams chat, retail scenarios. And all of a sudden, I've got a persistent chat record. I've got call records. I've got notes from meetings I've had within Teams. And I've got documents, right, that were shared that specifically reference retail priority scenarios. It's just an example of how we can use the power of the integrated Microsoft solution set to really shine a light on being more efficient in our Teams platform. You don't want to spend all that time searching for documentation. You want it right at your fingertips. You know, the next couple of features are really around the integration we can do across the full life cycle. Based on your existing devices and how you want to keep those upgraded with as the technology turns, and particularly now as more of us are working from home, you want to make sure that there's a range of devices that your application can work on. Teams does that. Whether it's a handset, whether it's a connected infrastructure, whether it's a smart TV, you can actually engage a Teams experience on so many devices now, and we're releasing more and more innovation in that circle all the time. And it also obviously integrates with all those line of business applications I talked about earlier. And finally, the Microsoft standard. We have compliance regulations, secure data protection rules. We have archiving and information backup and restore services available within any of our products. And we're extendable. We've got data centers in over 50 countries, 50 locations, right? We've got 50 plus languages that are supported on the stack itself. So if you think about, it's not just unavailable in a specific area. That doesn't exist within Microsoft's infrastructure. Teams as a platform is available across multiple languages, across multiple countries. A quick notice on what we're seeing with the customer momentum. And if you paid attention to some of our stock earnings, which, by the way, when I took over as CTO here in the US, our stock was around $80 a share. Now, I'm not taking full credit to how that growth platform has landed, but I'm going to go ahead and say we had something to do with it on my side of the organization. I've got great architects that have helped so many customers and so many partners take their solutions to market. And I think that's really the benefit of working with a company like ConvergeOne that has dedicated resources. And these are subject matter experts in our platform stack. If you think about it, I won't always have the ability to have a salesperson or an SSP, a solution specialist on my side, actually sit down with you as an end customer and help you figure out how to best utilize a platform like Teams. ConvergeOne does, though. They've got incredible scale, incredible series of both technical and business acumen leaders for you to really figure out the easy button on how you can be more efficient with how you work with your team, your employees, your company, but more importantly, how you can connect and drive value to customers and your partners. Think about this incredible customer momentum, 75 million plus active daily users, growing literally 1 million per week. It's incredible. Think about the average number of meeting minutes in a particular day, 200 million, right? And that is only going to increase. If there's one thing that we've learned about this COVID crisis and the response and the availability of technology, access to your data and information from home, is that they need to connect virtually in an efficient and secure manner. It's not going away. We are going to continue to drive innovation in this space, okay? I don't want you just to take it from me. I know I'm the Microsoft guy. These are big numbers. You've seen them before in our actual earnings release. I want you to hear it from a partner like ConvergeOne who actually is at the ground level, working through specific scenarios of how people think about reimagining productivity and connecting with their employees or connecting with their customers in a different way. And Jeff, I think you've got some really good industry-specific examples that you're willing to share with the crowd here.
Thanks for the overview on Teams. One thing we like to talk about is not just like kind of David's point, all these big numbers and things like that. We like to also relate it back to our end customers and what we've helped them with. And one area that's seemed to have exploded in the last year is definitely healthcare leveraging Teams. You've got integrations with Cerner and Epic and all these other utilities that healthcare workers use. Frontline workers using Teams for the secure communications instead of using iMessage or a text message, for instance, being HIPAA compliant. And this first use case that we had was a global customer, and they were using Microsoft Teams for project work. So they actually started off at a very small use case. Going back to our poll question, how are people using it? And they use it as a one-off and an augment to Skype for Business originally for instant messaging and chat. We helped them actually do a few POCs and pilots with some of the remote sites to actually get started on Teams Voice. And it was something new to their organization because, they've used a legacy PBX platform for a long time, but also they had a heavy investment in standards-based video. They were a heavy video user that use it for, conference meetings. Obviously, with being a global customer, it's hard to work globally without having that video aspect that David talked about earlier. And bringing that into Teams. Teams is great from a native experience, but when you have a heavy investment in a third-party tool like that, those standards-based video endpoints, how do I bring those into Teams? That's something that ConvergeOne can actually assist with, and that's what we did for this customer. We implemented PEXIP, which is a cloud video interop. That's a certified solution for Microsoft Teams that allow that bridging capability. The great piece about that is if I join with Teams, I get the Teams native experience. If I join with a Poly or a Cisco or life-size endpoint, I get the same experience that I would expect on a video unit. It doesn't give them just a refreshed version of Teams. It's actually what I would expect. So it makes it easier for user adoption as well. And as those video endpoints age out, we can talk about moving to an MTR type system as well. Another use case that we're seeing a lot more of Microsoft, had a heavy investment in SharePoint and OneDrive. If you're not familiar with those usually are used for file storage, cloud storage, file sync and share. That's another area. And one of the areas that Microsoft Teams really kind of opened up was having that conduit for SharePoint, making it easier for end users to access files, search for files. As David was mentioning, the search capability in Microsoft Teams and Office 365 is vastly better than anything else that's been out there previously. And this was one of the use cases where we talked about how do we move from an on-premise based file structure to something that's cloud ready, cloud first. And we looked at overall leveraging Teams and setting up that governance. That's one area that a lot of customers that we've spoken with over the last 6 months have said, well, I've already rolled out Teams, but they haven't thought about the governance and compliance. Microsoft has a lot of tools from a security perspective to make sure you're meeting the PCI, the HIPAA compliance that you need to for your organization, or GDPR, for instance. But you've got to enable those tools and you've got to have the governance around it. And that's one of the areas that we helped this customer with, was the governance and migration plan to use those cloud platforms first. One other area that we're seeing a lot of use cases around, obviously, is Teams Voice. And we've got experience from the legacy PBX world, whether it's, something that's on premise or a third-party cloud hosted voice. What we're getting a lot of questions about is, hey, I've been using Teams for IP, right? PC to PC, similar to what we're doing now. I've been using it for meetings. I haven't used PSTN or public telephone network. And how do I take my Teams client and voice enable it so I can call phone numbers? How can I call the local Domino's or Pizza Hut, for instance, using Teams? And they want to know, is there a cost savings potentially from that? And one of the things that we look at is actually we can dive into the total cost of ownership. And we've seen this with not just one, but probably almost 10 customers in the last 6 months, where there is a TCO savings by using something like Teams Voice versus a legacy aging on-premise voice infrastructure. And this is only for the voice workload. Just think about all the efficiencies you gain by actually doing Teams. Now I don't have to go to another site like Google Drive or something else to get documents, or, as David mentioned earlier, emailing back and forth. I see that all the time. And by using OneDrive, you use that capability. One, you free up your inbox. Two, now it's easier to work together as a team. But where do we get the TCO savings on this one? And it was really more around being able to be quickly able to deploy, so a flexible solution when they would light up sites across the globe, and using direct routing as a service from one of our partners in this space, coming with it with a full solution to look at, is this the right fit for the customer? Who's the best carrier provider from this space? And then also look at how quickly we can get that deployed. And that was another thing. Mean time to deployment was a lot quicker working with our team than them doing it with their own IT staff. Having us focus on that one workload or that one project so everybody can focus on their day-to-day job versus trying to get something implemented in a pinch, like when we have something like working remote, like COVID. Great use case, great story. And if one of the big things that we like to also talk about is our customer satisfaction. And really where it goes back to is that Net Promoter Score. And you may have, if you've worked with ConvergeOne in the past, you may have heard this. Year over year, we are consistently in the top for Net Promoter Score. And a lot of people think, well, you probably just send surveys to customers that like you, right? That's not true. This is actually a random survey that a third-party company does on our behalf. We want to know where we are and where we stack in that rank. And this is one of those things that year over year, we really work on trying to be the top integrator and solutions provider in the industry. And having that background from the legacy platforms to the cloud first, mobile first mentality really sets us apart from that perspective. And David, there's a lot of announcements that have recently been coming out. I'm a heavy LinkedIn user, so I see them all the time, even from our own MVPs that are on staff, constantly blogging. But I'm starting to see there's some new features that are on the roadmap as well. Would you like to talk about those? Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jeff. And I think the precision of the examples you gave, where customers across different industries, specifically seeking different outcomes, all based in
compliant, secure, efficient communications or engagement, collaboration, while also taking advantage of what they've already invested in, right? To not have to reinvent the wheel and reinvest in scenarios. And also think about different user scenarios that are more painful right now than others. Teams as a platform can support all of those. The other thing I would say, and I love that example you gave about SharePoint OneDrive. You know, SharePoint was the fastest product to $1 billion that we've had at the company. Teams has shattered that when you think about a growth perspective. And I think one of the reasons why is because we at Microsoft have a great depth of solutions or practices or products that we can enable in a productive environment, whether it's SharePoint, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, IM, Skype, chat, whether it's a calling infrastructure, whether it's Yammer. And there's a lot of times I get this question about which product or service do I use for what function? What's best for one-to-one communication? What's best for great network-wide communication, something like Yammer? How do I actually engage LinkedIn, which is our social engagement platform for business, obviously? How do I actually seek candidates or post roles within LinkedIn? The beautiful part about Teams is it is the easy navigation of how to use those applications and integrate with every piece of workflow. So you don't have to think about, oh, did I do that in Yammer? Let me open up Yammer. Is that file in OneDrive? Let me go to that OneDrive location. Is it in the SharePoint file? Is it in that file structure? Instead, when you leverage Teams, it is your jump point. That's why I always keep calling it the operating system of the future. Today, we log in and we put in our credentials for Windows. I immediately, as soon as I log into my computer in the morning, I just open up Teams. It's my operating system. It's my pivot point. It's my cockpit for every piece of content or interaction I want to have throughout the day, internal to Microsoft, and then obviously with our partners and customers. You know, I did want to make sure that we talked a little bit about the future of collaboration, what that means for us. And there's two important pieces to this. Number one, virtual connection and meeting people in a virtual space with meeting services is going to only increase as time goes on, like we talked about earlier. But there's also that lack of personal connection in person that a lot of people are still feeling. So how do you make that personal meeting feeling in a virtual environment? And we're constantly striving to innovate on this. There's some great blog posts right now, like you mentioned, out on LinkedIn or on our productivity blog. If you just search for Jared Spataro, who's our lead CVP on our marketing side with Office, there's great blog posts out there about how to leverage something like Teams to make sure you do connect your employees, you check in on them, you maintain that healthy and happy morale, even though some people are really missing that in-person connection that meetings can provide. As I mentioned before, because Teams is a by the people, for the people, in the cloud, by the cloud type of an application, we're constantly innovating in this specific space, right? And if you think about how often we're releasing service releases and feature updates, it's by the day where we release some other functionality. And some players in this space have had to really sort of try and catch up on the security, data protection, data integration, connectivity with third-party applications. Being that security and compliance is in our bedrock of services, that's what we're known for and trusted with by enterprises across the world. We've already got this foundation of security already enabled. We've got identity through Active Directory in Azure. So now we can just continue to innovate and automatically push out these incredible innovations to people on a regular basis without disrupting the full IT lifecycle of having to deploy new services or cycles, right? Some of the key features that are coming out in the future is one, this extension to 1,000 participants. Right now we can do 250 on a Teams meeting. Now we're going to 1,000 and we're going to extend it again after that. We used to only have kind of a 2 to 4 video person. Now we've got a 7x7 type of a view coming out, which will enable that full, if you think about the classroom or you think about a staff meeting perspective where you can see everybody's video on at the same time. Because again, video is becoming more and more relevant in these mobile scenarios. Together mode, the example you see here on the screen with people sitting in like a theater, this is really important for people to feel like they're connected and they're experiencing a meeting together. They're in the same room together. This together mode, you can play with the backgrounds and really interact with people who you want to sit next to and how you want to engage with those people. And so we found that when people are doing meetings, particularly online, they spend a lot of time looking at themselves, their picture, their camera as they're talking into the video. As opposed to the other people who are engaging or the content they're trying to look at. So this together mode, using AI to digitally put people together on a shared background, helps get you that conference room feel in a virtual environment. You know, one of my favorite features that we've released here internally, that we've taken some time now to work through the beta rollout and the first viewer readout, is the fact that when we first launched Teams, it was all one window. So if you had an instant message going in one window, but then you wanted to join a call, you had to actually switch out of that instant message window to go join that call and then try and go back. Now you can actually pop out those conversations in a bubble. So you can keep multiple windows of Teams open to do different pieces of functionality at the same time. It's a huge productivity benefit for me personally, and I know any information worker out there will see the same productivity on there as well. You know, there's a question in there about languages. There was a question in the panel there about, can I transcribe languages? Inline message translation real time can happen. So you as an individual user can customize your experience that whatever anybody's talking, now not only will we have speaker attribution, right? David Totten said XYZ. We can now transcribe that real time in whatever language you want. Over 50 languages available. Not only do we transcribe it in that language, we obviously keep a persistent and historic record of that dialogue. And if you decide you want to ship that off to somebody else to go and look at the quote unquote meeting notes or the conversation that happened, you can actually display and select the language that they can see that exact transcription in as well. It's an incredible feature to think about our international operating environments and how do we make sure that we're working across country and company bounds for language barriers that exist. Okay, a couple other things. Doing things like breakout rooms where you can have one live meeting with everybody involved and then you can break out into sub rooms or sub meetings. Very critical if you think about all hands meeting or group-wide meetings or company-wide meetings where you want to then break out into specific teams or specific breakout rooms. That feature is coming that you can allow for then brainstorming and live collaboration in a smaller environment and then bring that back to the main quote-unquote team to actually consolidate that feedback. And then finally, like I mentioned earlier, this brand new set of devices and enabled infrastructure that support that software plus service experience. You want to make sure you have the latest and greatest technology that Teams is applicable on. And we're continuing to extend how we can think about integrating Teams as a platform into those actual applications. Okay. Before we kick off into question and answer, because I know we've got some that are pending, I would just like to say one more time, Teams as a platform is very powerful, and you can do a lot of different things there. But it can also be overwhelming, because if you think about the volume of services or the volume of pieces of functionality that are enabled with Teams, I always get the same question from customers on a day-to-day basis. Where do I start? How do I start? What goes first? That's where a partner like ConvergeOne really adds their expertise. Remember, they've got deep business and technical acumen on our entire stack, and they will tell you what's the easiest to implement with the highest benefit. What's the easiest change management and organization alignment that you can have to get the most power out of the investment you have with Teams? Odds are, if you're an Office 365 customer, you've already got the power of Teams and you're not taking advantage of it. Let's help you with your total cost of ownership of IT applications. And let's really work through this managed service of how do you think about rolling out new technology and getting the best benefit from it. One of the great things about Teams is all the analytics and user scenarios you can actually drive on the back end about how people are engaging and interacting with each other. When you bring a partner like ConvergeOne, they've already got the templates on how that works. They already can help you optimize best practices on how to leverage Teams across your environment. They've already got scenarios in there that they can help coach you through so you can get the benefit that many of their other customers have gotten. You have to have a strong last mile partner like ConvergeOne to help you really see the value of this service that you can then operationalize in a systematic and efficient way. And so I really, again, for the final time, I swear, I just want to thank Jack and Ryan and the entire ConvergeOne team for how deep they've engaged and how much proficient engagement they've had with my team, with our field sales organization, with our engineering team, to really be able to be a first-party agent on our behalf to explain the value of our productivity stack to customers and really help our customers see the value and efficiency use of the Teams platform. So thank you again to the ConvergeOne team. And with that, we'd love to turn it over back to Linda for any sort of Q&A we want to address.
As we open the Q&A, remember to send your questions using the Q&A icon on your portal. While you consider your questions, Jeff, can you share with the audience some options they have for next steps?
To David's point about making sure we get the right fit is part of our waves methodology at ConvergeOne. And really what this goes into is we try to figure out from an organization perspective, business unit leaders, what features, what type of functionality, what's the real solution look like holistically? And that's where waves comes into fit. the workshops that we do are free of charge for our customers. And really it's our investment in our customers to build that relationship, to really find what are you looking for? What efficiencies need to be gained? And from that, we can figure out what's the right fit. Are there multiple solutions that we need to bring together? And we can actually do that as a service. That's one of the differentiators for us as ConvergeOne. And an example of that is doing what we call a CIE, or customer immersion experience. This is something that Microsoft has done over the years, and we've got CIE facilitators. A lot of people that don't understand what the platform has. David mentioned a lot of features and functionality today about Teams and what it can encompass. And a lot of people don't understand, where do I get started? How do I use this in my organization? How is it pertinent to me and what I'm going to do for my job? And that's what we try to do in a CIE, is actually evaluate and show you some of the capability. It's not a demo. It's not a training. It's more of a true test drive of the platform. And from there, we can actually figure out what else needs to be incorporated. As we mentioned, some of the use cases where we've got third-party products we need to integrate into Microsoft Teams. One of the things that's great about it is its extensibility in bringing in those third-party platforms. So don't feel like you're in the Microsoft solo and that's all you can do. If you'd like to learn more, we've obviously got a website link here that will be shared, as well as you can contact your local ConvergeOne account manager that works with you, and we will get something like that set up. And we'll go back to Q&A.
Excellent, Jeff. Thank you so much. So the first question we have is, based on the product roadmap for MS Teams, do you see it replacing MS Live events?
Let me take that one. No, we still believe in the MS Live's platform, right? As a broadcast scenario, we still believe that we want to be able to have a direct one-way feed into audiences. If you think about content management and content networking, video and voice is heavy and it's extensive. And so that broadcast functionality and how you use applications or ISV applications like Collective to help that CDN distribution network in a more efficient way, Teams is all integrated with that work. And so we want to give people the choice. We want to be able to do a live event where it's active and people can participate. We also want to enable that MS Live event push scenario where you can actually communicate out in a live streaming way without necessarily the interaction within the platform itself. And that's critical for depending on what your different user scenario is, right? Us here internally at Microsoft, generally we do Teams broadcast when we're doing that directly. And that's really about how we take a platform and push it out to many. If you think about our company-wide meeting, 150,000 employees, we don't necessarily want to open up a Teams exchange interaction where people can come off mute or people can, pop in with their IMs to the middle of Satya's dissertation to the team and our accountabilities to our customers. And so that specific user scenario will always remain. Live studios, live events, live broadcasts, where it's a push-out mechanism as opposed to an interactive mechanism. Good question, though.
Excellent, David. Thank you. The next question actually comes from a comment you made about how you use Teams. It's where can you view your email in Teams, and maybe you could just discuss how you use Teams instead of email as your communication.
Yeah, if you think about, the power of the platform itself is that it's all tied to Active Directory. It's all tied to your user account, right? And so when you've got Azure Active Directory installed and Teams is enabled, today, if you think about using a global address book, right? You get an email and you double click somebody and you get their contact information and you see who they report into if you've configured Exchange the right way. You can now do that within Teams directly by just hovering over that particular user. You can then get access to directly instant message them, see their contact information, where they're based at, their phone number, their email. You can see who they report to and what their organization structure is. The beautiful part about configuration systems and tools within Teams is that as the IT administrator, you can actually configure what you want that end user to see to a certain extent on that contact information. Now, obviously, if it's in an external network, you can see their contact information that you have stored, and you can see their email information if that's what they use to access your Teams environment, but maybe not their organization information, because why would somebody federate their tenant and their Active Directory into your environment that you're including them on? The collaboration work that we did on this specific podcast that we're doing right now, this specific webinar, we did within the ConvergeOne tenant of Teams. And so Jeff can immediately go in there and see my contact information, and he can even instant message me within that infrastructure. I can do the same with him. but I can't tell who he reports to or where his office location is. Vice versa, he can't look at my direct reports and their direct reports and ping one of them for more information. So there is some tenant-to-tenant restrictions that we do put on that, but within the same organization, it's a hover over scenario. And again, you can enable people to see your information by inviting them into your own team's environment.
Excellent. So the next question is on other collaboration platforms. Are there plans to further integrate other video conferencing platforms into Teams for companies who leverage Zoom or WebEx for conferencing, but also use Teams for other forms of collaboration?
On the record, no. We think, listen, the conferencing technology that exists is incredible. If you think about WebEx and where it came from, if you think about Zoom and the explosion of user scenarios that came with Zoom, there's a reason why Microsoft is unique and differentiated in this space. We believe in our security. We believe in our data privacy and protection. We believe in the functionality and integration across Microsoft's solutions and technology stack. We want to give both IT directors as well as end user information workers the same confidence in the platform that they're leveraging. We think the competition in this space obviously is huge, particularly with remote work. But there's a reason why Microsoft has existed for 45 plus years now and why we are the trusted IT and services provider for so many companies. We believe in our data protection. We believe in not being breached or exposing your information to other external people. And because Cisco or Zoom or there's other platforms out there have their own platforms, we love that. We think that's great. That increases the appetite for mobile connectivity and remote experiences. But we believe in the fundamental principles of user experience, data protection, privacy, and compliance. And that's why we're differentiated in that space. I would love every company or customer or individual who uses another conferencing platform not to think about how to best integrate that platform with Teams, but just use Teams. You're already paying for it. You already have access to it. You might as well leverage the full functionality that's within Teams that some of those other providers don't have.
Great. So the next question is, what are some strategies for moving an organization from email-centric communication to Teams first?
Well, let me give you my perspective, and then Jeff, I would love your perspective. I think you've got a lot of key insights on what you're seeing at end customer level. This is the hardest organization transformation scenario that we actually see in the enterprise. It's not necessarily when you update a CRM system or an ERP application, or you update from on-premise server storage and compute into an IaaS or cloud-based server and storage. It's really about the end user. And there's three things that we found as best practices. One, you have to really make a concerted effort, right, to make sure people are aware of functionality that are in there. Here at Microsoft, we actually had something called Project Sprint, which is where we took a lot of that email communication and we started tracking the amount of time people spent within Teams and how they were interacting within Teams, right? Once you get those analytics from the Teams environment, then you can go and do group or individual coaching on how to use the functionality within Teams instead of using email. So number one, you just have to make it very, very direct and accountable by encouraging and putting start and stop dates on that process. Two, people traditionally don't use products that they're not comfortable or confident with. So there's got to be a lot of documentation, right, enabled through Teams. And that means that we as Microsoft have had to deploy a lot of instruction manuals and quick access guides and things that you can do with Teams that'll take 7 clicks down to 2 or 1. And that process of helping users and end user adoption training has accelerated the growth of Teams everywhere. But it's also important to note that if you start getting more people confident with the platform, they'll naturally start using that platform as the first priority instead of going directly to email or walking down the hall to stick a Post-it note on somebody's door. The third thing that we've seen here internally, right? So I've talked about making a very purposeful sprint to getting people to use the technology. Number two, I've talked about end user documentation and training modules, which we have a ton of and ConvergeOne is very, very familiar with. The third one is you just have to start organically building this trust in the Teams experience. I personally think about this, the amount of people I interact with, the amount of people I talk to, they know if they're going to send me an email, I might not see it or might not respond for several days. So how do you think the preferred mechanism of communication is for me? It's through Teams. And that's how we need to start building from a culture perspective, is from an individual contributor all the way down to a leader or an executive. We've got to start building that culture of, if you want to get a hold of me or you want my response, push it through Teams. If you want me to look at a document, I won't open an attachment in email. but I will look at it in my Teams environment. And once you start with that tone of leveraging Teams, and that's where I want my information conveyed, and that's where you'll get responsiveness, that's how you can slowly start to shift that culture. Now, we are a platform company. We don't think email will ever go away. There's billions of users on Microsoft email platforms across the company. So we still support that. We still have the same data protection, search, artificial intelligence capabilities within email. But what we're seeing is there's a much more efficient environment within Teams. And to be able to connect people individually to live collaborate or share information is so much more efficient in Teams. And so those three sort of forcing mechanisms to push a little bit more of a wider adoption within your organization, I think help a great deal. So Jeff, let me pause there and get your feedback on what you're saying.
I think, the biggest shift, like you mentioned, it comes down to training and adoption and change management. So any type of business transformation requires education, training, and that whole adoption plan. And one of the big things I think that a lot of people miss with Office 365 in general, they think it's Exchange Online and Office apps. And when I hear that, I'm glad to see we've got people using Teams for 2 or more workloads. That's awesome. It's about that adoption and how you get that efficiency. A lot of times people don't know what they don't know. And that's where, like a CIE, we can show them, ask some questions, and now their end users are talking to each other. You've got a session of 11 or 12 business leader people, and they're going back and forth. You might talk about flagging an email, or you might talk about, hey, did you know that you can search persistent chat? Or those types of efficiencies come into play. And then they see it and they go, I can see the use case for doing X. And that's really the power of doing a Waves engagement with ConvergeOne, is us being able to identify that and show you the value before actually implementing the product. And then it comes into, how are we going to have the adoption plan? What are we going to focus on first? What's the low-hanging fruit of efficiency gained by leveraging this feature in Teams so people keep going back to Teams for that one thing? FAQ and bots. Perfect example. HR, you've got a set of questions that people keep asking about insurance, about benefits, et cetera, especially benefits enrollment time. That could actually all be automated by a bot. And if they need help beyond that, then connect them with a live person. And that's all done through Teams. That's a way to drive adoption. You've got to come up with those strategies. And that's been what's really been successful for us.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question is about integration with a current Avaya communication system. This is specific to mass message communication for an emergency. They're a university and they need a sort of quote-unquote shooter on campus alert capability. At this point, they're using an IBM same time, but they'd like to leverage Teams for that same purpose.
David, let me take that one. So the good thing about Microsoft is they have a bunch of different business partners. They make the core infrastructure, they make the core app. For that particular example, there are some players in that space that integrate natively with Microsoft Teams. Single Wire could be a great case there, and they can do things like digital signage, emergency phones, mass text messaging, all tied back into Teams. And you can even populate a Teams message that gets sent out to every Teams user in the university or the school. We've seen a lot of use cases for that for K through 12 as well as higher ed.
Thank you, Jeff. The next question is, does Teams allow recording of audio and video, and where is it stored, cloud or locally? We have a HIPAA-compliant company.
So if you do a Teams meeting, that will actually be stored on Microsoft Stream, and it is cloud-based. As long as Office 365 is set up for HIPAA compliance, meaning there's the controls in place, all data is encrypted at rest. That checks that box. If you need MFA, that can be provided by Office 365 as well. And anything that you do as far as email or SharePoint, those permissions are transferred to Stream as well.
Yeah, how we think about that internally, particularly with HIPAA compliance, is we are a HIPAA compliant platform in general. And so we enable that with online streaming. We also then, from a distribution perspective, you can actually take local copies of content that's recorded through Stream if you enable that functionality. And if you're not familiar with Microsoft Stream, it is a platform that we leverage to produce recordings or meeting recordings after they happen, or you can just record a standard video and upload it into Stream. That's that content delivery network capability that we're enabling with Teams broad scale. You can take a local recording then, obviously, and submit that and transfer that anywhere. So you can actually keep something on premise if you really need to, and you enable that piece of functionality within Microsoft Stream as well.
So this is for a user that's already utilizing Teams for multiple functions. They've been looking to leverage it for their voice infrastructure. One of the questions that they get is whether or not they can keep their current phone numbers and extensions. I understand that Teams leverages resource accounts, but can we tie that to existing phone architecture?
You can absolutely integrate a third-party PBX or third-party voice system with Teams. That would be using direct routing, which we talked about earlier. And depending on what you're looking to do, the whole idea behind moving to a Microsoft-based solution, even from the early days back to 2007, it's been a while, is to use people's names and an address, not a phone number or an extension. I'm going to call David. I'm not going to call extension 51342. And can you incorporate extensions? Absolutely. But part of using a Microsoft platform is doing that business transformation and starting to leverage those new features. I know a lot of people on my team, we don't even know the phone numbers. We just click and hit the phone button and call. And that's the idea, is eventually over time, you start to phase out the extension dialing and start doing more of the, I'm going to call this person. I'm going to call this department.
Yeah, Microsoft as a platform obviously does voice over IP communications. We also offer calling plans and the cloud PBX solution. So if you're destined to want to have phone numbers and connectivity, you can replace your infrastructure with a cloud PBX sort of solution with direct routing, and then end up enabling endpoint and conversation styles to a specific number or an extension. And so, yes, we can adopt a traditional telco type of an operating model. That's one of the benefits of our platform, and we're continuing to invest. And we do that through a standard cloud PBX offering.
Great. And the next one is, can you use Stream to external email addresses of your organization?
Yes. Yeah, so Stream, if you think about Stream and being an access to Stream, it's just like any other platform within Microsoft. You can share external to your organization content that you produce or publish. There's some authentication processes that happen there, but just like I could take a document and store it somewhere on my local tenant, I can extend that into a tenant that somebody else can have access to.
Great. And earlier in the session, David, you mentioned a blogger with posts related to making meetings more meaningful and personable. Was that on LinkedIn?
Yes, and I'll make sure to do a post after this with Jared's contact information. And if you just go out and search the future of productivity with the name Jared, Jared, you'll see he's our spiritual leader when it comes to productivity and the innovation gains that we're making with teams on a regular basis.
Great. And we do still have a few questions, but we're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and follow up with those questions directly to those users. And let's go ahead and get our webinar closed out here. We'd like to thank you for joining our webinar and hearing our enabling your team to enable your business. Thank you, Ryan, Jeff, and our special guest, David, for sharing the strength of the ConvergeOne and Microsoft partnership. This call was recorded, and the on-demand recording will be sent to you and posted on ConvergeOne.com. Please remember to take the survey and also include what topics you are interested in hearing more about. Clearly, we are already seeing the impact that effective tools can support and strengthen your team environment and boost productivity. Equipping your teams with leading collaboration tools sets your company apart when driving business results in this new work from home and remote worker era that we're all experiencing. ConvergeOne is ready to partner with you on this new path using Microsoft and this powerful tool of Teams and help you grow your business that will truly help your team collaborate and excel in supporting your clients. This concludes the call for today. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. Have a terrific Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.